Did you know that those freezing walls, which drove the most dangerous wizards in the world to madness, were not originally built to be a prison? Most people think Azkaban was established by the Ministry of Magic as a penitentiary, but the truth is far more blood-curdling. In reality, this island was a dark trap, not even marked on maps, just waiting for its prey. But whose trap was it? You will find out shortly. Imagine an island in the freezing, turbulent waters of the North Sea, where the storms never cease. In the 15th century, a wizard named Ekrizdis lived on this desolate piece of rock. Ekrizdis wasn't just an ordinary dark wizard. He was an explorer who had lost his mind, delving into the deepest, most disgusting catacombs of dark magic. Think about it. If you had limitless power on an island that even the Ministry of Magic was unaware of, would you use this power to change the world, or to create your own dark kingdom, like Ekrizdis did? He chose the second path. He turned the island into a massive, pitch-black fortress. But his intention was not to live in it alone. Ekrizdis used dark magic like a web to lure Muggle sailors whose paths crossed those waters to the island. The poor sailors entered the fortress doors, thinking they had found a safe haven in the storm. However, those massive iron doors never opened outward again. Ekrizdis subjected these sailors to unimaginable tortures, testing the limits of the dark arts with their screams. The pain permeating the walls was so intense, so deep, that the island itself began to turn into a monster. The Dementors. They were not brought here from the outside. They were born from the pure terror of Ekrizdis's victims and the dark magic on the island. If you remember, in our Hogwarts Founders video, we talked about the ideals of Salazar Slytherin. While the Founders built a massive school to illuminate the wizarding world, Ekrizdis had created a slaughterhouse to destroy Muggles. Two completely opposite worlds, light and pure darkness. After Ekrizdis' death, the dark charms concealing the island slowly lost their effect. Only then did the Ministry of Magic realize the island's existence. They sent a group of officials there to investigate. Imagine being in the shoes of those officials. If you opened the door and found a landscape of horror with thousands of Dementors hovering, would you turn around and run, or try to bring these monsters under control? The officials who set foot on the island were so horrified by the sight that they refused to talk about what they found inside for a long time. Every corner of the fortress was crawling with these creatures, feeding on despair. Initially, the consensus among everyone in the ministry was the same. This disgusting place must be razed to the ground, and the Dementors destroyed. But fear clung to them like skin. They feared that if they destroyed the castle, these entities, stripped of their home, would spread to the mainland, to wizarding villages. It would be an unstoppable catastrophe. At this exact point, the ministry made one of the most controversial and blood-curdling decisions in history. With the International Statute of Secrecy coming into effect, a new prison was already needed. Why use small shelters when they could use this ready-built island that had its own natural guards? They made a deal with the Dementors. The deal was simple. The creatures would stay on the island, and the ministry would regularly send them souls. I mean, prisoners, to feed on. They had, in a way, sat at the table with the devil. No one could have predicted at that moment that anyone who entered Azkaban would never come out the same again. Because Dementors don't just imprison the body, they cause a person to continuously relive their worst memories. Azkaban was no longer a stone building. It was a bottomless pit where hope completely died. This terrifying structure of Azkaban wasn't actually the only prison in the wizarding world. You remember Gellert Grindelwald. He had built his own prison, Nurmengard, for the greater good. But there was a blood-curdling difference between Nurmengard and Azkaban. While Grindelwald used his castle to imprison his enemies, sort of creating a political symbol, Azkaban had only one purpose: to rot souls. On one side laid an ideology, albeit a twisted one. On the other lay pure, feral madness. Well, what would you have done if you were in Albus Dumbledore's shoes? Would you turn a blind eye to the Ministry using Dementors? Or would you risk it all and wipe that island off the map? Let's discuss in the comments, because Dumbledore was stuck in this exact dilemma. In our previous video, we analyzed the vision of the Hogwarts founders in detail. Right across from those bright ideals stand the rotten walls of Azkaban. Dumbledore always felt a deep revulsion towards the existence of this island and the Dementors standing guard. Because those monsters couldn't tell the difference between the guilty and the innocent. All that mattered to them was the presence of a warm soul they could suck. And these greedy creatures would prove to the whole world how weak their loyalty was when they finally found their true master years later. Let's go to the darkest era of wizarding history, to the rise of Voldemort. When the Dark Lord arrived at the gates of Azkaban at the height of his power, the air inside changed suddenly. The Dementors were not afraid of this pale, snake-faced wizard entering the building. On the contrary, the scent of pure evil and death he radiated completely enchanted them. Voldemort made them an offer they couldn't refuse. If they joined his ranks, he would give them as many souls, as many victims as they wanted. The deafening silence of the prison was broken by the Dementors submitting to the Lord. Those loyal guards the Ministry thought they had controlled for centuries had actually just been waiting for a greater evil to arrive. Weak leaders like Cornelius Fudge, however, continued to deny this reality for years. The Minister of Magic deluded himself, thinking the Dementors were still under his command. Just as he rejected Voldemort's return, Cornelius also failed to see that the control of Azkaban was slipping from their hands. This denial and blindness would exact a very heavy toll on the wizarding world. When Harry Potter faced the true face of those cold walls years later, he had a hard time understanding how Sirius Black was able to escape from there. Because escaping from Azkaban was impossible. Not because the walls were high, but because the prisoners had no minds left to plot an escape. The Dementors sucked all the happy memories in the captives' minds like a vacuum, leaving behind only their deepest traumas. That is exactly why Harry heard his mother's final screams. Their breath would freeze a person's bones, blur their vision, and shatter their will to live like a block of ice. However, Sirius was able to keep his mind intact thanks to that obsessive belief given by his innocence. Since this belief was not a happy memory, the Dementors couldn't rip it out of him. And of course, his ability to transform into a dog allowed him to slip past the blind eyes of the creatures. Because Dementors don't see with their eyes. They only feel emotions, and an animal's emotions were not as complex as a human's. Even when Harry encountered the terror of Azkaban on the Hogwarts Express, he felt that rotting cold to his bones. That black, tattered, cloaked figure that appeared at the compartment door sucked not only the light around it, but also the joy. The water froze, the windows cracked, and Harry was pulled into the deepest void he had ever felt in his life. Just think about it. If just one of these creatures creates such an effect, what kind of nightmare is it to be stuck in the middle of thousands of them for years? So the real punishment of Azkaban was not the island itself, but this never-ending psychological torment. When the Death Eaters escaped from the prison en masse, the fragile illusion the Ministry had maintained for years also collapsed. Voldemort had taken back his army, releasing the Dementors from the island to the mainland. Now the sky was darker, the fog denser. That cursed legacy of Azkaban, that dark ritual started by Ekrizdis centuries ago, was finally spreading to the whole world. That great mass breakout in 1996 wasn't just about 10 Death Eaters escaping. It was the collapse of the Ministry of Magic's hubris. For years, they had deluded themselves, saying, "We control these monsters." Well, if it were you, would you make a business deal with a creature that naturally feeds on your happiest memories? Or would you seal this cursed island completely? The Ministry chose the former, and unfortunately, the whole world paid the price. When the Dementors left Azkaban and switched sides, not only wizards, but even Muggles felt this heavy catastrophe. Do you remember that freezing cold that suddenly hit in the middle of summer? That gloomy and thick fog covering the sky? These were not ordinary weather events. They were the terrifying result of Dementors breeding uncontrollably and choosing their victims. That dark rot that Ekrizdis started centuries ago had now seeped into every street of Britain. Until the final fall of the Dark Lord, Azkaban functioned literally as a death camp. Innocent wizards left inside were abandoned to the endless hunger of the Dementors. The walls echoed with the screams of Muggleborns and those who opposed the regime. Just like what Ekrizdis did to those poor sailors in the very beginning, history was repeating itself in its most brutal form. After the Second Wizarding War, when Kingsley became the Minister for Magic, he finally put a harsh end to this cycle of terror. One of the first and most definitive decisions of the new administration was the complete banishment of Dementors from Azkaban. That centuries-old bloody pact made with the devil was torn up and thrown away. The security of the island was now entrusted to Aurors, qualified human wizards. Undoubtedly, young and visionary witches with a high sense of justice, like Hermione, had a huge part in this revolutionary change. That bright vision Dumbledore defended for years had managed to cross the borders of Hogwarts and cleanse even the darkest island. However, Azkaban, that massive triangle made of old black stone, still stands silently in the middle of the sea. Completely erasing that century-old suffering carved into its walls is a task perhaps too difficult for any magic to accomplish. Even though Ekrizdis' name has been forgotten, the echoes of the hell he created will continue to blend with the sound of the waves. So, do you think the Dementors were completely destroyed? Or are they waiting in a desolate corner of the world for a new master to summon them?
Make sure to share your thoughts with us in the comments. I'll be reading every single one of them. If you enjoyed exploring these hidden, dark corners of the wizarding world, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can also reach our other video about the founders of Hogwarts right away from the link on the screen.
Until the next mystery, always keep your wands at the ready.